Thank you very much. I hope no one does feel the physical effects of a punch in the stomach. I pride myself on being kind of a wuss, so hopefully that won't be a lasting impression. The other thing, two things that I do wish to apologize for up front. One, I have a really bad leg, so I'm not one of those active speakers that moves across the stage. I'm afraid I'm one of those leaning speakers. So to this side of the room, I'm not trying to avoid you. I just have to do this. And secondly, I fell prey to some nasty little spring-summer cough. So occasionally it will sound like I have tuberculosis, but I can reassure you I do not. So when Catherine asked me to speak at this, it was quite some time ago. It was at a time when the world looked pretty darn dire, and we thought we were going to have a whole bunch of right-wing political people. And so the conversation was going to be a lot about, oh my goodness, what can we in tech do to turn this around? But fortunately, things are moving in a slightly different direction. So today's talk is less going to be about my initial career in politics, although there are obviously some references to it, and a bit more about what is it about truth, and does it really matter when we think about the things we're trying to solve in life today. So this is my mom. Her name is Susie. She was my truth guru. She was the one who helped me understand what is right, what is wrong, what is real, what is not. Indeed, what is truth? When I look at the definition of truth, it makes me realize that, that quality or state of being true, something that's in accordance with fact or reality. Indeed, in my youth, with my mother, these are things that kept repeating themselves. Birth. Birth is true. You are birth. You are alive. You are there. That is a truth. It does happen. Sadly, so is death. It does happen. But then I finished university and I took my first job. My first job was in Washington, D.C. And it was a very interesting job. But one of the most important things that it taught me was, I'm not quite sure what the truth is anymore. I stopped being a lobbyist on behalf of the research-based pharmaceutical industry because many years ago, got some good healthy wrinkles here. So many, many years ago, I was asked to walk around Capitol Hill, which is where members of Congress and senators have their offices, and I was asked to tell them that a 275% increase in a particular prescription drug that was only used by people over 75 years old was a really good thing. It was very important. I was not supposed to emphasize the fact that this drug would go off patent in 18 months. And I also was not really supposed to make a big deal about the fact that it was for the elderly. And at that time in the United States, the elderly did not have any prescription drug benefits, so it was coming out of their own pocket. This just didn't sit right. Because really, my argument, my truth for doing this was that it cost $250 million to produce a new prescription drug. And if we weren't allowed to do this price increase of 275%, for the remaining 18 months that this drug was on patent, we might not be able to create any new drugs. We'll run out of money. There'll be no cash. That, of course, if you would look at a cash flow balance sheet of any major pharmaceutical company, should have appeared ludicrous to you. But the emotion of people will die. There will be no new drugs if we don't get this price increase. So I did it for about a week. And then I had an epiphany, and I thought, this is not what I want to do. And that was the beginning of my questioning if the truth really did matter very much. Because there was truth in that statement. It did cost $250 million. It did, it was important to create new drugs. But I wasn't sure anymore. So then I realized what my condition was all those years ago. I indeed was faced with post-truth. As the media told me over and over again in 2016, post-truth being the replacement of actual fact with emotion, with all kinds of things. And then I thought, as I sat there preparing for this speech, so the media made a big deal about post-truth in 2016, but was that actually new? I mean, let's face it. Mussolini on the right looks really, really, really powerful and a leader. Mussolini on the left looks like a wuss who can't control his horse. That's a post-truth, because they just kind of washed the handler out of the photograph. It was much more important to have that emotion. He is a powerful man. And then I thought about, well, what are some other old versions of post-truth? That your dentist would tell you that a cigarette was good for you because it wouldn't irritate your throat. Or that, so many doctors smoke it. It's got to be okay. That's amazing. I did take out the one that said, if you don't want to be fat, you better smoke. So, there's been a lot of post-truth. It didn't just show up in 2016. And then there's things like this. There's that emotional appeal. Big, fat liar. We knew he was a liar for a long time. But he used all that emotion. He used all that bullying. He's just as post-truth as this. But in 2016, it got really ugly. It got really ugly because ugly, hideous people were able to do some incredibly vulgar things. What was the difference? One difference that I observed, and again, this is my personal stuff, so trust me, no punch in the stomach, but these are things that I've been thinking about for the last few years. One big difference was technology let it go so far so fast. I mean, when somebody was vulgar and gross, I had a friend who worked in Los Angeles city politics, and she was part of an education reform project. And she was in a bar one night with a few of her friends, and somebody walked up to her and said, "Are you part of that stupid learn?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And he promptly punched her in the nose. Broke her nose, blood everywhere. But that didn't go out to millions of people. That happened among 10 or 15. It was vulgar, it was gross, it was offensive. He disagreed. But it suddenly wasn't everywhere. And I think that's where that post-truth started to take on a real different feeling. I was able, again, the privilege, thanks to Catherine, to speak in Berlin. And in that speech, I talked a lot about technology and things that had been bubbling up for years and years. The ability to say mean things didn't just start in 2016, but I think it really began to catch everyone's conscience. There are other things about post-truth in 2016 that became really annoying. The fact that it was just so irrational. I mean, seriously, this is a recent headline, but it could have come out at any point in time during the campaign. Her father, who issued some of the most hideous and vicious things ever through technology, suddenly daughter's like, "I can't believe everyone's so mean to Daddy. I can't believe it. He's such a good man." And although I have an American accent, I've lived in Europe for 20 years, but this is just too much fun. It's too much fun to point this stuff out, because this is just gross. Come on, have a laugh. It's gross. And the whole point is, she would have been whining in a Park Avenue flat. She would have been whining over cocktails with friends. Now when she whines, millions of people hear it. Some people happen to agree with her. Some people don't. But it's all based on emotion. And then there's my personal favorite that made 2016 post-truth really painful to me as an individual. The blatant lying. I did start in politics. I was asked to shift the emphasis on we need money to pay for drugs. But it was true. A new drug did cost $250 million, and it was going to be a 275% price increase. We didn't do this. Now, people have lied all their lives. We saw Lance Armstrong and things like this. But in 2016, this stuff just got evil. And if you're not aware of this, basically, the people behind this woke up the next morning, the day after the famous Brexit vote, and said, "Wow, yeah, that was never true. We were never going to do that." They just admitted it within hours of the vote count being final. So this is what made post-truth particularly hideous in 2016. We know that technology played a role in it. We know that technology will claim it didn't play a role in it, but it did. But I'm not here today, weirdly enough, to focus on that. Shame, shame, shame. I'm here to focus on, does truth matter? Is that the thing that we should worry about? Because if we have so many examples in our lives where we are now increasingly confident that the person isn't saying the truth, we're not necessarily ourselves saying something that we're proud and truthful, is that really the important thing if we're trying to figure out ways to make society better and to get the best use out of technology? I think the good news is there's a bit of a trend shift happening. So for all of the pain and agony that some of us, and again, my apologies, there may be a lot of people in this room who are completely comfortable with Donald Trump and completely comfortable with Brexit, which I actually do respect, because that's one of my things, is that people are allowed to disagree and have different points of view. Technology, when it allows you to be particularly vicious and hideous, that's not quite so compelling. But this shift that we've seen so far in 2017, which completely changed what I thought I might need to say today to make everyone want to go out and save the world, is nice. We didn't get her. I realize that from an academic standpoint, people will say social media possibly didn't play a very large role in the French campaign, but for me today, I'm enjoying a rather simple view of the world. We didn't get her. That's a good thing. So her total lies, which I'm comfortable saying so many of them were, they were not the truth, her post-truth appeal to emotion didn't work as well in 2017. And for those of you who are familiar, this is the Labour Manifesto. For the many, not the few. And if you, by chance, follow the UK elections, much to everyone's surprise or shock horror, depending on one's tax situation or political beliefs, didn't quite go the way they thought it would. And a lot of people are sensing that one of the reasons was because this manifesto, this Labour Party, suddenly was talking about nice things, good things. You'll notice I didn't say they were telling the truth, but they were at least talking about nice things. And another interesting trend in 2017, and again, because of my old life, it's one worth watching, is what is happening in small local elections in the US. Now, the Democrats who just unseated a whole bunch of Republicans don't necessarily rule the world, but it was kind of fun to read this on the Huffington Post because some of these seats had been held by Republicans for over 100 years. In the same way that the Conservatives lost a seat last week that had been held in Canterbury since the time the seat was created, so nearly 90+ years. So these are little trends, but please, I'm actually not saying this is about the truth. They're just trends that say it's a different trend from 2016. And I think one of the reasons that these trends may be happening, again, personal opinion, is because the people who are suddenly getting more involved in voting, who are suddenly stepping up, raising their arms, wanting to be heard, they just want a different truth to be part of the conversation. So we come back to my mom, and we come back to why this is titled When the Truth No Longer Matters. My mother has extremely advanced dementia. And if any of you know someone with dementia, it has a really insidious side to it, which is, and I don't know this for sure, but it has to be true, I think they know it's happening to them. And I certainly believe my mother knew it was happening to her. So back in 2008, my husband and I were visiting her. And she had an idyllic life. She lived on a little saltwater-fed canal north of Los Angeles, California. And she had a little tiny electric canal boat. And we were all going to go out on it. And we wanted to clean it off. It had a little bit of bird poo on it. It was a little unsightly. You don't want to sit there having a nice little cruise with all this schmutz on the boat. And so my husband says to my mom, where's the water hose? Where's this? And she hands him an electric cable, the very same electric cable that is used to charge the battery on her tiny little canal boat. And my husband says, oh, Susie, where's the hose? This is the cable. And she looks at him, and in this amazing cheery face, she says, oh, that does both. I used it just yesterday. It works very well. And for my husband, who's a solid Brit, who hadn't seen this before, it took a minute, and he kind of looked at me, and I said, I don't know. That's when we knew something was definitely going wrong. We cleaned the boat, and we went on. But at that point, we started listening, and we realized that my mother started saying more and more outrageous things. But to her, they were the truth. She wasn't telling lies. And I learned, because I had to learn more about dementia. This is an excellent book, by the way. Again, I hope none of you have to deal with dementia. It is a horrible disease. My mother was a most vibrant and amazing woman. Little tangent. My favorite story, the Olympics went through Los Angeles in 1984. She had just come back from a fishing trip in the Arctic Circle. She had literally got off the plane. She was covered. She has very fair skin. She was covered in cold, horrible sores and things from all the sun and the extreme weather. She goes in the house. I want to tell you I was really young. I wasn't that young. She mixes a pitcher of martinis. She gets in the car, don't worry, she hadn't started drinking them yet, and it grabs me, goes up not very far from our house, sits down with all the neighbors who came out with their chairs to see the torch really going by, and pours martinis for everyone. So that as the runners go by, everyone can drink a toast, have a martini, and say, oh, isn't Los Angeles wonderful? That's my mom. But she's not like that now. She's a shell. She smiles a lot. We're very fortunate. She's not angry. But she is a shell. That being said, though, I learned something from this book, and I've now decided that this actually might be very important in the world that we live in today. When you're dealing with someone who has dementia, it is not useful to tell them they are wrong. Because, as I said, I have this hypothesis that they actually know what's happening to them. So when you tell them they're wrong, they get agitated. They get angry. They get emotional. It makes it worse. I spent the last year of my life working on an agile transformation. And I came to Agile not because I'm a developer, not because I had worked in this place before, but because I loved the commitment to collaboration and good communication and things like that. But I learned something unexpectedly in my last year working in the Agile community. There are a lot of people who use a lot of anger and energy fighting for what they say is the truth and telling other people that what they say isn't the truth. I'd like to recommend they read this book. Because if you challenge people and tell them they're wrong, unsurprisingly, we get emotional. We get defensive. Think back to those horrible tweets. Think back to the serious global embarrassment of what's going on right now with Donald Trump and the former FBI director. He lied, no, he lied, no, he lied, no, he lied. These are not useful things because someone's trying to prove there's truth. If I learned anything from my mother's really, really tragic disease, it's that it isn't about telling the truth. It's about listening. It's about finding ways to continue the conversation. It's about being gentle, about being patient, and it's about being calm. If that doesn't apply to every situation we're seeing in politics right now, and again, I'd say to what I saw in Agile Transformation recently, I hope that's the one thing you'll take from this. Life is better if you're calm and you listen. I've been really fortunate. I've been able to do a lot of different things. Catherine only touched on a few of them. I've had 8 different careers, lived in lots of different countries. This is my favorite project I have ever done. And it's all about, does the truth really matter? So in 1985-ish, Mandela was elected president of South Africa. And CocaCola suddenly had a competitor. Pepsi-Cola was introduced into the black townships. Within 2 weeks, they had taken 55% market share from Coca-Cola. Sales had just plummeted. The South African team of Coca-Cola were about to invest millions of rand to come up with an advertising campaign to remind people that Coca-Cola was always there for them. Coca-Cola was there during apartheid, Pepsi was not. We were always there for you, we were with you, we're there, we're wonderful, remember us, love us. But interestingly, some of the guys back in Atlanta said, we're not sure that they really have the right story here, that they have the truth. So I was sent for 3 weeks with another gentleman. We had political backgrounds, and we were sent to do kind of focus group, political-type interviews. And I had the glorious privilege of spending 3 weeks talking to teens from black townships. This was within months. This was before the Rugby World Cup. It was just so new in Mandela's presidency. I've met first with the executives in Johannesburg. They were so sure that Coca-Cola was hated because it was there. So we need to run a campaign to remind them they should love us. I just love the arrogance of advertising. It's so amusing. And they were angry. They were furious that they were being punished for having been here, for having stuck around, for having allowed them to have sugary, dark beverages. But then we went out and started talking to these kids. And first of all, how I wish the story had ended happily for all of them. But wow, at that time, I had just finished 3 weeks of research in the US in inner cities. Similar project. What is the problem between Coke and Pepsi? Inner city kids in the US can be 3rd and 4th generation gang member families, things like that. They don't have a lot of hope. They certainly didn't back then, 1995. So here I am talking to these young people, And they say the most amazing things, like data says if I get an education, I have a future. And data says all I have to do is stay in school and I'll have a future. And then we started talking about their habits, what they buy, because you don't just kind of hit them and say, why aren't you buying Coke? You sort of try to show some level of understanding and interest. I hadn't really learned how important learning was until this project, or listening was until this project. And at the end of 3 weeks, after being told by the research company that they had never had a white executive spend so much time in the townships, which I'm grateful I did, this is what came out of this project. There were 3 reasons why Coca-Cola's share had really tanked. The first one was, imagine being 14 years old and never being able to choose anything. You would walk into your little shack of a shop, and everything was the same, every day, every week, for 14 years. Suddenly you got to choose something else. Why wouldn't you? There was no hatred of Coca-Cola. I was just never able to say anything but Coca-Cola, and now I'd like to say Pepsi. I'd like to try something else. So that was one. The second one was Coca-Cola had been there all during apartheid, and they had sponsored football, soccer, all played on dirt fields. There was no grass in the townships. And that had been the only sport these kids had ever known. Pepsi comes in. They introduce basketball clinics. They bring cricket. They bring other sports into the townships. These kids had never tried anything new. They had never been able to play a different sport. It was just fun. But the third one, for me, was the best one. The one that taught me just shut up and listen. This was a culture that was based on sharing. When someone had a funeral, they would do a collection to all the houses to pay for it. I genuinely don't think Pepsi knew this when they launched, but they chose to launch with a 1.25-liter bottle, whereas Coke had a 1-liter bottle. So you're thinking, oh, great, I can have more. No, here's what the kid said. I can pour a 4th glass for my friends. So they could share more. It was fantastic. Now, again, I wish there was a happy ending because basically the Pepsi bottler went bankrupt and it closed and Coke probably didn't have to change anything. These things happen. But I'm being a little selfish here and telling you what it did for me. It told me that anything that I assume is the truth, I gotta go validate. I gotta go question. But the only way I can do that is if I shut up and listen. Because I think it's really important to understand the voice of the people who you want to do things with. The world that we live in today is full of people who like to tell you the truth. They like to tell you their truth is the right truth and your truth is the wrong truth. And they get really animated about it. I'm totally fine, by the way, if this isn't working for you. I apologize if it isn't, because I don't like wasting people's time. But I'm not expecting you to go, wow, my life has changed because of this. I'm appreciative of the indulgence of being able to share a few things. So that being said, if you're surrounded by those people who yell at you, who bully you, who make their point, who resort to Twitter, who tell you you're wrong, I just want you to know the trends are looking a little bit better. They're still going to be around. But the trends are looking hopeful, that people are beginning to challenge if it's all about truth or if it's about that conversation. The Coca-Cola thing told me that it wasn't about truth because these guys were going to invest millions. They thought they knew the truth. It was about the conversation. Because when you have the conversation, you really understand what people care about. Some of these attempts at moving beyond truth to good conversations, collaboration, coalition building, they're going to be facilitated by technology. Some might say they already are. Again, in my Berlin talk, which seemed like new news then, but wow, it's just so well covered now, people didn't realize how much their information was being streamlined. And my challenge in Berlin was, please, please, as people who understand tech, don't fight with people, don't disagree with them, don't challenge them, just help them see how much their information is streamlined, because these things matter. And that's why I have to give this little health warning, which is whenever you have a fantastically wealthy and ambitious company telling you that they're transparent and that they really want to help build communities, please be skeptical. Doesn't mean they're bad, doesn't mean, but just be skeptical. Because at the end of the day, I used to work in media, and people always ask me about news, and I just remind them, news is about selling ads. It is. Those ads go along with the editorial because they're interesting to the people who want them, and the ads are there. It's okay, we live in a capitalist society. Just remember it. And as smart tech people, you can help people remember this, that although everyone wants to believe that Facebook is a wonderful place and it brings people together, there are other reasons that they sit in their highly securitized offices. We just need to remind them. A very, very dear friend of mine brought this book to my attention, The Culture of Connectivity, A Critical History of Social Media. I'm not an academic, that should be obvious by now, but it's a very interesting book. And I found this quote particularly useful because I do think there's a lot of truth to it. It's okay, all these companies are here. That early belief in what the internet was about, that it was all about community, it was all about free. You know, Wikipedia is probably the only thing left that might be free. Most things now have corporations involved. They need to make money, they need to reward their shareholders. Just remember that. And as people who work in tech, help other people understand that in a way that isn't angry and isn't threatening. I have no idea what these guys are going to talk about at 2 o'clock, but the title in and of itself tells me, please think about listening to it. Because a friend of mine gave me access to a global study that was done, very, very secret by some of those big brands on the previous slide. I won't get her fired. But in that study, it was very clear that the issue for 2017 and 2018 for large corporations is going to be tech ethics. Because consumers are beginning to understand what's being done. You can help them really understand. I'm not saying it's all evil. It's about making money. This is okay. When people understand things, they can make better decisions. But that's just a little free plug. He had no idea it was coming, although he's shaking his head. I'm very pleased. Because once I saw that title, I thought, I'm going to be there for that. I know it's important. So in kind of a weird, rambling way, which hopefully made some lines for you, this is where the journey brings me. As a human being, I no longer seek the truth. I do not believe truth matters. I have a mother who had many truths, and now, bless her heart, nothing she says is truthful. She told everyone my brother was the head of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. Everyone. God bless her. Let her do it. It's just not important. The thing that is important for me is conversation and collaboration. And again, health warning about companies that make money off that, health warning about things I've observed in the Agile community that claim to be encouraging it, but don't seem to be sometimes. Stand up for your voice, stand up for your thoughts. You don't have to follow one person, you don't have to follow one thing. But you do have to know how to calmly and purposefully have conversations with people, build coalitions, and find ways to work together. That's what I'm after. You have let me ramble on a little bit today, for which I'm very grateful. So I have violated my own rule of shut up and listen, so I apologize. And therefore, I'm going to be quiet and leave you with one thought. The thing I'd like to point out is this next quote was said in 2010. It was said a long time ago, before things got a lot worse. So rather than get you depressed, please remember the trends that we're seeing in 2017. They're not all based on truth, by the way. I mean, to be fair, the Labour Party won a lot of youth votes because it said it would wipe out student debt and do a bunch of things that, as far as I can tell, there's no way the government can pay for. But what the heck, it got them involved. It got them in the conversation. And actually, weirdly enough, I'm okay with that. Because yes, they might be disappointed, but if they keep sitting down and being part of the conversation, not only will they learn, but they'll be able to understand how things work in government. So with that, I didn't quite take the full 40 minutes, but I thought you might want to be spared an American accent. I am glad I didn't cough, though, because it's pretty gross. So I'll leave you with this as a thought.